Okay. All right. So hello, everybody. Welcome to Semantic Kernel Public Community Office Hours. Always have to say public because it's a public forum. So if you do come off mute or share anything, know that it's done in a public setting. So don't expose anything that you don't want. Um, One thing to call out is that actually, this is the wrong date, I realize. So let me update that. But one thing is that while we've been having it at this current time for office hours, 2:30 p.m. Pacific, based off feedback from the community, we are knowing that we have more people from the Europe time zone. We are going to adjust the hours to um, perhaps be back to where we were before, which was 11 a.m. Pacific. Anyway, we'll figure it out. We'll uh, put it on Discord and see what uh, what people say. But yes, we're gonna update the time, and yeah, so stay tuned for that. One thing for you all is, if you haven't already, please fill out the survey in terms of helping us get better. I'll just drop it in the chat if I can copy it. But yes, we want to improve. We want to learn more about you and make the appropriate investments to do that. So feel free to fill that out if you have the time. Should take no more than 3 minutes. All right. And while that's coming in, so announcements. We have some new blog posts. Actually, one new blog post from compared to last week. But Soham, if you remember, he introduced the Semantic Kernel Java version in his previous blog post, and now he created an updated one using planners. And so if you're a Java developer, definitely read this post, check it out, and yeah, let us know how it is, what the feedback is. In terms of other announcements, these are the latest in terms of .NET, Java, and Python. So make sure you pull the latest packages to get the most up-to-date code. We will be continuing to release new things, especially, I know at least from the Python side, there's a lot coming in the near term. So look forward to this 0.3.9 release from there. And same thing for .NET Java. Make sure to stay up to date what's happening. Some more announcements is, we've been doing, or I've been doing some more, reach out with you all, the community, and putting some videos together. So some, the Java one with Soham is over here, as well as the one with Joowon, where he helped implement the Python sequential and stepwise planner. And also the conversation with Zain from Weaviate. So Zain helped create the integration with Weaviate, the vector database, and Semantic Kernel. And we had a really good discussion, not only featuring that, but also, what is the future beyond vector search? I think Zain and the Weaviate people have some very interesting things going on. So definitely check those out. Okay, so without further ado, we actually have quite a lot of questions to go through today. But as always, if you want to raise your hand, if you want to come off mute, just feel free to do so, or put things in the chat, and we can come to them. But I'll start off. So we have a question from Colin. So Colin says, I need to convert a large Oracle data model and a large Oracle PL SQL code base to another database, SQL Server. As part of the conversion process, how can SK be used to convert a large Oracle data model and PL SQL code base to SQL Server? For pipeline creation, how can a pipeline be created within SK to allow for an iterative process of translation, refinement, and retranslation? Okay, interesting. And for memory utilization, would it be possible to use memory within SK to hold the extensive data model, hundreds of tables with hundreds of columns during the code translation process? It may be useful to have the data model available when translating the code. Okay, so a lot of great questions here. I will try to answer, but as in previewing the questions that came in this week, I realized that I will not have a lot of the answers this time around. So if you all from the call, want to contribute any thoughts, please do. But yeah, anyway, so let's first look at what some of the comments came in. So from Evan and Chris. So Evan says you can use SK to ask the LLM to create scripts for this. You can hook up Oracle and SQL as a virtual table. Okay. Chris says you may consider targeting a codex model as opposed to natural language. Okay, interesting. So my initial read on this is that the translation work, I think there's a really great use case, and like how can you use it to, or how can you use SK to solve this? It would be a pipeline, I would say, right? If you have this existing code base, outside of the SQL context, right? I've talked to customers or people looking to migrate code bases to, legacy code bases to something a bit more modern, and the models themselves, right? GPT-4, etc. They may do a decent job at this, but as Chris mentions, maybe a more fine-tuned model or more specific model, like a codex type model, could be more appropriate. If you're going to be using SK for this, right, you likely, I'm just, uh, really brainstorming here, but you'd have to create some custom skills for this, custom plugins. Ideally, in my opinion, I think you would want to show examples of PL, SQL, and whatever the SQL Server, uh, what that translation looks like. Just give the model some hints, really. And if you could do that, maybe, right, the model inside of its own weights has seen enough of these types of queries to be able to translate it. So it would be this more type of iterative process. You may have to run it multiple times. Yeah, like I'd say it's to me it's really an emerging area where it hasn't been explored a ton, at least from what I've seen. So would love to see, what comes out of it. Does anyone else have any ideas or thoughts on this? One thing I would add is this like last part about memory, where if you have a large enough context window to hold the data model with at least the description of all the tables and columns and all that, like that's great. That'll be good. I would reference potentially the work that our team did. Where is this? Where Chris Rickman worked on kind of NL to SQL and noted several of the challenges inherent in this problem. So yeah, I would imagine that you're going to quickly run into the token limits, and that I would venture to guess like you probably want to use some combination of intelligent retrieval, embeddings, and all that with your memory, so that you can do a RAG pattern style solution to solve this. Michael, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, a question. So regarding his third bullet point on pipeline creation, is could it be that he's referring to maybe like establishing some type of prompt chain that runs the initial, task or instruction of taking, some Oracle PL to convert to SQL Server? And like how would he architect that using semantic kernel? So you mentioned him or her having to discuss to create custom plugins, but can you touch a little bit more on like how you can create like this sequential prompt chain within SK?
Yeah. So you can manually do this chaining of skills / plugins, right? And you could do like a run async on using the kernel and just you list those out and you run them one after the other. One thing that is coming soon that I think even people in the community have asked about is there's this other product at Microsoft called PromptFlow, and PromptFlow actually, right, is meant to create these what they call flows, right? But the idea is that you encapsulate all this business logic, which can be semantic kernel based um, components, and yeah, you like this could be part of a larger pipeline that you that let's just call it the flow. I don't know, translate flow. I don't know, but the goal is right. You use this flow with all the functions, plugins, skills that you have, and yeah, you can run it. Uh, you could put that flow as an endpoint, and then like call it and run it as you do. So I know it's a little hand wavy. I don't have a slide right now that I can show for that or diagram, but that is something that will come out soon. Actually, we have some content as a teaser, right, for you all.
Yeah, awesome, great. Thanks for that.
Yeah, of course. Lucas, I see you left a comment in the chat. Do you want to maybe just come off mute and share your thoughts?
Yeah, I can do that. So the way I think one thing I would do is to create a a plugin that validates the end result. I think that's going to save you time because once you run your stuff, you run the plugin after to see if the result is valid T-SQL, that is the SQL for SQL Server. And another thing that I would put into this workflow is something that filters your data model. So you have this huge data model and you get this new like script from PL SQL that you want to translate. You could have a plugin that just filters your data model just to the relevant part. And then you can get the result of that plugin and plug in into your translation table. So your translation plugin. So when you're saying translate this PL SQL to T SQL, you put just the part of the schema that is relevant to that. I think that is going to help you a lot because if the model is big and you always carry the whole model into the translation prompt, it might overflow it. But if you can just keep the smaller part, the part you need is going to really help. So that's the way I would structure the pipeline.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, to not try to solve it all in one go, single mega prompt, but to break it up into different components. I think it's a great strategy. I actually see Chopra or a vendor.
Hi.
Have your hand up.
So I had a question. I've been looking for a way to use semantic kernel with a locally downloaded, like a Hugging Face model. And I've seen some documentation and an example app for doing that in Python. But I was specifically looking for C#, .NET. And I'm also wondering, like basically a sort of a way to expose such an item as a web API in a performant manner, because these are large data, these are large models, and we would kind of need. Actually, that's me. I asked this question.
Yes, I remember. That's why I clicked on it. Yeah, good question. Happy to jump ahead on this. So the short answer is there's not a native way to do this in .NET or C#, at least not that I'm aware of. So that's why Python does quote unquote like lead in this area, just because they have the native transformer library from Hugging Face. So, but so the option is, right, as we see here, right, you can stand up a Hugging Face server, and that could be a separate thing, and you're just making API calls against that inside .NET. So yeah, that's unfortunately what I would say. This is where, right, because the bulk of the AI, ML, data science, open source energy is in Python. Languages like .NET, Java, yeah, they need to catch up in some way. So yeah, I don't have a better answer for that.
Okay, thanks.
But I think if you make enough noise, maybe the C# gurus and Hugging Face can collaborate on something. But no, it's a good question. All right, so moving on. So from Alexander. Alexander asks, what are the principles and guidelines for contributing to this project by extending the core skills set with custom, more complex skills that are of generic utility for the developers and users of the library? An example I was thinking of is the conversational retrieval plugin.cs implemented by me while learning semantic kernel and LangChain, working on my own projects using these technologies. The plugin consists of both semantic and native skills to achieve a conversational skill to discuss about own data. It is based on the great conversational retrieval chain from LangChain. There are many more skills that can be added to SK. My questions are, should these skills be made part of the core skills in the semantic kernel project? Should these skills be published as external libraries? If both, what are the criteria and guidelines? Okay, that's a fantastic question because I think it highlights one of the differences between semantic kernel and LangChain. So LangChain has actually a lot of great, I would call it opinionated samples or opinionated ways to do things, and that's why it's probably it's gotten so much great traction from hobbyists to actual developers who really want to just go straight to the value, right, of building something and doing it with like the minimal lines of code as possible. Semantic kernel, at least for now, right, has taken the more, we're going to provide the Lego blocks, if you will, right, the pieces, the components, and yes, there is a like opinion, like all SDKs are basically opinions about how to do things, right? But things like this, like a conversational retrieval plugin, where it basically does a lot of things all at once, from the like the RAG pattern to the conversational skill, like that prompt they're using. Yeah, I think there's a place for those type of higher level opinionated examples. Like if people like Alexander want to do this or contribute to this. So first question is like, should this be part of the core semantic kernel project? Maybe. I think it'd be good to have at least a sample. Would it be part of like the core semantic kernel? I don't know. I can't give that answer. I think this would be for the SK team to resolve, or the architects to resolve. But in terms of like an published external library, I think we're also updating our contribution guidelines you'll see that soon later, and we'll make more a concrete announcement about it. But one thing that we are moving towards is we really appreciate so much of the connectors and things like this coming from the community. But as you all can imagine, right, our team's not so big, and we can't keep track of all these third-party connectors, plugins, and all that are coming into the kernel. So what we probably are going to move towards, or go towards, is have the developer, have the team, have the organization that is building these external libraries or plugins or skills. Have you all own that, the connectors, and yeah, so as a developer experience, it'll probably look something like you may need to install multiple NuGet packages, multiple pick packages to get that working. So even though, yes, we have several that have come from the community, third-party PRs and whatnot that have been really good, and I think a lot of people are using this already. I think for the long-term health of the project, we want the kernel to be just very small, super lightweight, not have a lot of dependencies and all that. So in order to maintain that or keep that philosophy, right, we will need to adopt this like a true plugin model, right, where you're building plugins and you add those into the kernel, but those plugins live separately. So hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if anyone here on the call wants to ask questions or talk about that some more, but yeah, I think this question from Alexander, I think it's a good one to at least highlight this direction that we're going. Gina, do you want to share what you put on the comment or the chat?
So yes, so folks that don't know me, I'm also one of the engineers working on SK, and I think that is, what we want to get to is have a vibrant community of developers creating plugins, but they don't all need to come into our repo, like Alex said. We just do not have the resources maintained. We want you to own the plugins you create, but it would be nice if we can get to a point where we'd have some sort of central marketplace or way you can find all of these that exist, and then leverage other community plugins as well. I see Chris commented in the chat that model works for VS Code. I know others have done this. And so hopefully that's something we will be able to move towards. I don't know that we have concrete plans to make that happen just yet, but I think that's probably the direction we want to go in.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to maybe share a little bit on models that you've seen work well, or why VS Code has been able to do this successfully from your vantage point? If you're available. If that's okay, we can move on.
I think Michael made a good point in the chat here too, that, keeping the kernel lightweight, you don't want to add extra bloat that people don't necessarily need and make it unwieldy to use. We want to keep things simple, but then composable.
Yes. +1. Thumbs up. Okay. Sounds good. So next question from I don't know how to pronounce this, Koyelia. Hopefully I didn't botch it too bad. Anyway, you ask, so the background is we're using Azure Synapse dedicated SQL pool as our DWH, data warehouse, I think, which has over 50 dimensions. The requirements is to provide insights based on the dimension as queried by the user through a bot, which is calling Azure OpenAI GPT-3.5 Turbo to convert the NLP to SQL queries. Issue: the user would not mention the dimension name in the query, which is essential for right SQL query to be created. So the query of user to be so the query from the user has to be reformatted by identifying what dimension is being asked. For the matching with the dimension, we would need to perform semantic search on the database. Okay, so question: if the dedicated SQL pool is the dedicated SQL pool to be connected with the semantic kernel, and is semantic kernel the right solution for this? Okay, so this is a good question. I think somewhat similar to the discussion we had earlier, but basically, yes, if you're in this world where you have many dimensions, many columns, right, in your database, and you're trying to do some type of NL to SQL, yeah, like it could very well be that the answer to a user's question may not have, or that question may not have the corresponding dimension, that corresponding column name that needs to be answered, or that needs to be incorporated in the answer. So in that scenario, well, a couple things. One is make sure that your descriptions for the column are as verbose as possible, and as descriptive, non-overlapping as possible. So that, just think of it as, the way I think of it is, if you're a data scientist, data analyst type, and you were given a task to answer your boss's question on just got muted. But yeah, if you're a data scientist, data analyst, and you're tasked with answering this question, like, how would you solve it? You would look at all the columns, you would look at the names of such, and yeah, and you would create a SQL query based off all that. So in a similar way, right, the large language model could solve this, by selecting if there are too many column names, then you have to do a retrieval pattern, right, to extract out the most important, most relevant names to look at, and then base your SQL query from there. So all in all, the answer is yes, you could use semantic kernel to help solve this, and yeah, reference some of the work that is out there, the work that Chris did with his NL to SQL blog post to help solve this. So Chris, I see your hand up.
Sorry, I couldn't get off mute before. So for this question and for the other question, one of the patterns that I've been using is to use a data catalog. So Microsoft has Purview, there's several other ones. So typically in there, you'd read in your schemas, you'd have your lineage. You can also connect your data assets, column names, et cetera, with data catalogs. So things that mean something in your organization, and then use that as a source of truth as basically a RAG pattern to feed the model. So super effective, and happy to share that. Yeah.
Is that data catalog just like some separate document that you're ingesting?
Yeah, so Microsoft has Purview. There's other ones out there. Purview is based on the Atlas API. So you'd ingest all of your schemas, your data, your data dictionaries, et cetera, and basically create a graph and relate everything together. And then you'd say, hey, I want to write a query that does X, Y, Z. And then you'd get back a JSON from the data catalog and then use that to feed your language model.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, well, definitely check that out if you're interested. Thank you for that. Okay, so Alexander asked a different question this time. So what are the plans and the progress on implementing the OpenAI function calling in SK? There's an issue, seemingly no progress. So good question, because we have Gina on the line who can give a quick update on this.
Yes, I can. Yes, so there has been progress on this. I think we have like a couple different issues tracking, and so I don't know if this issue has been updated, but we are seeing progress in this space. So we did get a PR to add the support for the Python SDK, and we're currently reviewing that. Myself, my coworker Abby, are reviewing that and working with the contributor to think through, like, does that design, is that going to work as well for .NET? We'll be starting the .NET work for this in the next week or so. So you should be seeing it over the next couple weeks. So this is definitely, it's one of our top priorities right now. We're just working with the resources we have to keep things moving. So it is a highly anticipated feature. And yes, that is the PR for the Python support.
Yeah, so if you all are interested in this, which we've heard many, many times that people are, check out this PR, add comments to it.
Yeah, I definitely encourage community involvement on this one. I think for me, as I'm trying to wrap my head around, the open AI functions and like what we already have in the semantic kernel with the planner and how those two play together, I think there's still a lot of questions we have about what should be the design here and how do we, use both of those features together to open up possibilities for users and for developers. So if you have thoughts on what you'd like to see there, we definitely want to hear them.
Cool. I'm gonna open a couple links that Chris sent over for what he mentioned, the question before, Apache Atlas and Pi Apache Atlas. Yes, if people are interested, I'll also, actually, I don't know if I can open this on mine. I'm not logged in. Okay, I'm not. Anyway, reach out to Chris to learn more about this. All right, thank you. Thank you, Gina. All right, next question from David. David asks, I'm hitting significant issues with Azure Content Management Policy. I have a book that I've ingested as paragraphs, about 400K of text and around 2,300 paragraphs. I've created embeddings for these without issue. I'm creating an abridged version of the text by chunking it into sections and based on the author's intent, and then to chapters and parts. I end up with around 110 sections. I run each section through an abridged function, but then hit CMP, some of the sections containing paragraphs that break the rules, mild stuff, and get chunked out without saying where it failed. I've tried sending the paragraphs as a list to another test CMP function redactor that asks GPT-3.5 to return pass-fail for each paragraph by checking each one by one based on CMP, but it throws the whole thing out. My current solution is to run each paragraph in the failed section through one by one and handle the exception as a fail. So slow. I'm going to request higher level of CMP, currently at default of medium, but that just moves the issue to another level. Horror/medical books will fail, I would think. Any advice? Okay, this is a great question. Sounds like a good use case for people who are looking to summarize text or do anything with text, and especially text that may include sensitive or what's the word? Like, yeah, just content that may be flagged by the content management service or policy or whatever guardrails that exists for different models. Well, I'm not sure. What do you all think from the community? Do you have any thoughts on this? How do you do this? Because a lot of this is like dictated by the model provider they're using, right? There's some models, I've seen some models out there that kind of pitch themselves as like, hey, we have zero content filtering or content management. You could do anything you want. So I guess, right, if you truly want something that just works and doesn't, I guess throw exceptions and all that, then you could use one of those models, those unhinged GPT type models. But I don't know but if you're trying to use something more compliant or more responsible AI, like what would that look like? I mean, I think the approach that David brings up is a very sensible one in terms of actually he has a continuation. I forgot about this. So it gives this example. So the app is C#. I'm using GPT-3.5 Turbo and CMP is medium. and it returns several of these things. The response is filtered to the prompt triggering Azure OpenAI's content management policy. Please modify your prompt and retry. Yeah, I mean, unless you like rewrite the content, which I mean, I think that defeats a lot of the purposes of this, then yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, what's the analogy? Like you have a round peg and a square thing. You're just trying to like fit them together. It's not working. Lucas, you have your hand up?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a great idea, but you can try to use a simpler model like BERT to classify the chunks into risky or non-risky. I think this goes in the direction that you're saying. And maybe you like skip those or just like try to rewrite them before submitting it to a model that has CMP enabled. That's probably how I would do it. I do work with this information data, and this ended up being, we did those two things. We did the BERT solution, and we ended up doing what David suggests, that slow solution. We didn't do anything else yet.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, thanks for sharing it.
I'll jump in here. My other thought is that you could try to catch that particular exception lower in the stack rather than have it bubble up to wherever you're getting that. When you're sending the request, if you're expecting that there might be something that's being caught in the content management policy, you may be able to catch that specific exception and then like, move on without noisily erroring out. But otherwise, I think the other suggestions here might be better to pursue. I think this is just a hard one with the, that's the, I'm assuming this is Azure OpenAI, like that's part of the policy that you get with the compliance that comes with it.
Yep. Well, good question, David. Be curious to hear what your solution is later. Okay, a simple question from Ben, or maybe it's simple, but Ben asks, what is the best way to get started with SK, plugins, skills, and all that other stuff? And it links to the Chat Copilot. So again, for people who don't know, Chat Copilot is our reference sample for building a chatbot. And I think a lot of people go to this as a starting point to just see how everything works together with Semantic Kernel. So in terms of getting started, I guess the question, Ben, is like, are you looking to get started as a contributor, like find some issues to solve and make PRs for? Then you could follow our GitHub project board. We have a similar one for Chat Copilot over here, so you could look at that. But you probably want to, the other way to interpret the question is, yeah, how to just understand all these topics. So, Chat Copilot, while being a reference sample, I will also admit that there's a lot in there. And it could be maybe a little overwhelming to just see all that and try to, parse through what's going on. If you want to really get started with concepts, my recommendation is to look at things. Whoops, I don't want to. Look at things like our documentation page. So, this gives a good, narrated type walkthrough of the semantic kernel and the different components of it. The other is, based off the language, so .NET, Python, Java's in the other branch, but we have notebooks as well going over the topics, the key topics, and yeah, each one has like important ideas that are present in the kernel. So if you want to learn all those things, definitely look at that. Plugins is one thing that we're centralizing on. At some point, the skills will be renamed to plugins. But if you want to build a plugin, one neat thing about Chat Copilot is that you can test your plugins directly inside that app. So and you could do that for free, right? Because at least for now, right? ChatGPT, to do this using ChatGPT, you would have to be a premium or plus subscriber, and that costs $20 a month. But you could do that for free using Chat Copilot. And I posted a few videos on my YouTube channel showing a few examples of that. So if you just go to YouTube, type in Semantic Kernel plugin, you should hopefully be able to find something. So hopefully that's helpful, Ben. Let us know how else you want to get some help. All right. So next question from Dave is not specifically a SK question, but OpenAI just announced the ability to fine-tune GPT-3.5 Turbo. Is there a word on when Azure OpenAI will support this, like it does with the foundation models? So this is a very interesting announcement because for a while, right, I think the fine-tuning. I think for a while, let's go to the original post. That I think the guidance was that, oh yeah, fine-tuning too expensive. Just use the base model and use prompt engineering, few-shot learning, and context learning to solve your problem. But with the release of this fine-tuning API, you can actually build, you just bring your data, right, and you can create a more customized version of GPT-3.5 Turbo that you can use for your applications. One thing I will point out, I don't know if it's explicitly easy to tell here, but it is going to be more expensive than using the base model, as you can imagine. And really the sort of decision or trade-off is like, if you find yourself creating really long prompts, right, really verbose prompts in order to build your skills or plugins, then maybe you can actually reduce that by fine-tuning a GPT-3.5 Turbo model, because when you fine-tune it, you actually can effectively kind of like encode the system prompt, system message inside the or whatever sort of like metadata inside your fine-tuning run. So in theory, that should reduce the number of tokens that you use when you actually infer the model. But if you look at it, fine-tuned models, the inference cost is, I think I saw it's like 6 or 8 times more expensive than the base model. So again, it's like at some point there's like this crossover of the when does it make economic sense to do this? So anyway, so that's all just like intro to what this GPT-3.5 Turbo model is. But I guess the question is, when will Azure OpenAI have this? Usually Azure OpenAI is like a couple weeks delay or so, sometimes a little longer. I think that happened with the OpenAI functions, parameter or update. So I would expect this to come through in the next few weeks, Dave. So. Okay, we covered Andy's question. Okay, so Colin, I think same Colin from earlier. So as a follow-up to my previous question about translating code, can you speak about things to keep in mind when building applications that generate or understand code, such as GitHub Copilot Chat? Thanks. Okay, so I will, first ask the community or people here, do you all have any best tips or examples or patterns for how you generate or understand code with the model? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'll find the links. GitHub itself, they have a lot of really good articles on how they design their system and the techniques that they use to translate the code and context, et cetera. I'll find some links and drop them in the chat, if that's okay.
Yeah, please. Yeah, so I personally, in my own, kind of exploration of this, I haven't done too much of this in particular. So, but generating code. Okay, so I will say from the data that I've seen, right, that there are certain languages like Python and maybe JavaScript that the model is a lot better at, just because it's seen a lot more examples for. And yeah, so if you want to have code generated, like one interesting thing that you could do is to have the model generate something like Python, and you can express in your API, or sorry, you can express in your prompt the API that you want to have generated, and yeah, the model can return back some pretty interesting or working often and like properly syntaxed Python or JavaScript code. So you see Chris sent over the link. So yes, this looks like a very interesting blog post. Let's see if there's any quick snippet that we can find. Prompt crafting, fine tuning. Okay, there's a lot here. I would encourage the listeners and watchers of Office Hours to dig into this post. Colin, yeah, definitely check this out if you haven't already. But cool, thank you for the question. All right, we have a few minutes left and 2 more questions. So Miguel asks, different ways to integrate plugins, tips and tricks. What are the best planners for what type of plugin? Fine-tuning of parameters like relevancy threshold, intent, parameter, temperature, etc. I'm starting to get creative with the plugins that can be created, but I'm having trouble when I implement 2 plugins at a time, for example, deciding which types of planners to use and so on. This new issue from Copilot, Chat Copilot, on having a plugin that calls an API to restart an Azure VM seems really interesting. I'd like to know how to deal with this operation. It's not supported by REST API operations runner error. How should we format the output of the native function that makes the call to the API and uses a post method so that it finally lets the user know the action has been done? Okay, very good question. I wish I knew more in depth about Chat Copilot to be able to give a good answer. But okay, in terms of like the first part, like best planners to use for what type of plugin. So let's just list it out, right? We have sequential planner, action planner, and stepwise planner, at least in C#. Python will soon have all 3 very soon. And this leads to Steve's question in the chat. Is a sequential planner a chain of thought, COT pattern or other? So the sequential planner is, yes, more or less, you could think of it like a chain of thought, because the idea, well, with chain of thought, you provide examples to help, and you explain the reasoning, right, for how a model, how the planner should be solving a problem. So a sequential planner, takes the skills that are available, plugins available to the kernel, and will output a plan that can be run in sequence, right, step by step. And yeah, like that step-by-step language is very akin to the chain of thought pattern. So for scenarios where you want that type of experience, right, sequential planner, good option. Action planner is all about, among all the skills that you have, select the one most relevant skill to use. So in a scenario where you have many plugins or plugins or skills, and you want the planner to just give you that one, let's call it like next step to use, then action planner is what you want to use. Stepwise planner is the one where you're given an ask or the query from the user, and instead of a like generated plan, like a static plan, the stepwise planner has a notion of like thoughts, observations, and kind of like this internal dialogue as it goes to, or as it tries to navigate to solve the problem. And it will, incorporate, these different observations and step throughs as it ultimately tries to like give you that final answer. And so all throughout that, right, all as you're building these things, you can modify some of the parameters, temperature, whatnot, and I think that's the area of exploration that you have to go through, navigate. So as you're building this, so I don't know if Gina or anyone has thoughts on the second part, because I don't have the answer to this. So
yeah, so I was curious about this, and I see this is like a very fresh issue that came up earlier today or last night. I was taking a look at it. So I think the linked issue here was that they're seeing this operation is not supported by REST API operation runner, which is because we don't actually support. We wanted to enable users to import plugins that are just from any Open API specification, but there's so many different parameters that make up the Open API specification. We don't support them all yet. We scoped down to a few to kind of demonstrate how this could be done, and we haven't gotten to supporting everything. And in this case, they're trying to use some, there's some field in the spec they're trying to import that we don't support yet. So that's like why they're getting the error. And then, but I think it's a totally like a great question about how do you handle this error? And I don't have a great answer to it right off the bat, but it's one I definitely want to look into a bit more because I think it's a really good question.
Yeah, for sure. Miguel, let's, I guess, have this discussion over GitHub on the issues. But thank you for the question. All right, last one. Last couple minutes. Daniel asks, I feel that I do not get answers as good as those given by the website version of ChatGPT 3.5, even with the same prompt. I'm currently using the GPT 3.5 Turbo model with Azure OpenAI. What might be the reason for the differences? How can I improve my skills, semantic function, or its configuration to make the answers I get be of better quality? Can SK give answers similar to website? Thank you. Yeah. So this is where all the best practices of prompt engineering start coming through, right? I don't know what is behind the scenes of the ChatGPT.OpenAI, right, implementation. So yes, as Chris mentions in the chat, it's all about the prompt. So it really depends on what you're trying to do, right? So it's just some high-level examples is like, be specific in terms of what you want to accomplish, give examples, ask the model or ask the skill to maybe do this step by step, right? All these sort of like tips and tricks that you see from research and the community, right? Just incorporate that in your skill building. It's definitely an art right now than a science. So the more creative you are, verbose, you might discover some new techniques. But yeah, like this really just boils down to becoming a good or better prompt engineer. So yeah, Daniel, practice your prompting to get better, and I think you will match, if not exceed, what you see on ChatGPT, the website. All right, so those are all the questions. And I don't see any new things in chat. Actually, okay. I see one from Ludovic. My SK extension in VS Code is stuck. I'm not able to change my Azure connection. How can I debug it? I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. So file, I don't know if we've heard of file issues for VS Code extension, but maybe it's just a regular GitHub. Put it there for now, right? If you have an issue, we have a VS Code extension channel on Discord, so feel free to put that question there too, and hopefully someone can answer that. Okay, I think with that, that's a wrap. And again, thank you everyone for joining. See you all next time at hopefully a new time for office hours. We'll let you all know through Discord and all that. Great. Take care. Bye-bye.